think that after my sermon. I've titled today's sermon, Christmas with the Herods. Not the cranks, but the Herods. I just want to start with a little personal reflection or personal story of some of my fondest childhood memories. And I reflect upon Christmas, as many of us do, through the nostalgic eyes of our fondest childhood memories of Christmas. Do we not? Well, I can remember waking up one Christmas morning and there was a bike, sort of wrapped up, but you could see it was a bike. And I just sat there and I thought, oh, how lucky my brother is, my older brother. And not for 1 minute did I think that the bike was going to be given to me. So when my mum came down, they gave the presents and she gave it to me, I was just shocked. And that's a memory of Christmas that will stay with me forever. But that's just one. I have thousands of wonderful childhood memories of Christmas. We used to go to the Anglican church at midnight, and we used to do what was called the Mass, or the Christmas singing of the carols at midnight. And I used to love it. We used to take our friends from the youth group, and then we'd come home and Mum and Dad would allow us to have one present each. And that was so good. That was like a mini pre-Christmas. And I can remember sitting in the stairs looking at the lounge room of the Christmas lights. We used to turn everything off. And there was just this warm glow, that you get. And I almost felt like this, I can't explain it. It was like this wonderful warm moment that's stayed with me forever. And so whenever I see Christmas lights, I have this fond memory that just won't go away. And then the family gathering. My uncle used to come around on Boxing Day and he'd bring his trumpet and my mum would play on the organ and would sing Christmas carols together. It was just a great time of family. It was a great time of festivity, and it was a great time. And it's very nostalgic for me. But yet, funny thing is, and here's where my sermon's about to take a bit of a left turn, is that lots of people have childhood memories of Christmas, don't they? And they have nostalgic memories and fond memories. And it was asked recently of people what their favourite Christmas movies were. And here's some of the answers. Home Alone, Elf, Die Hard, of course, yeah, people get it, Die Hard, and Christmas with the Cranks. And they all have fond memories that are equal to my fond memories, and they all have nostalgic moments as I have nostalgic moments. But is it the same Christmas that we're celebrating? And I'd have to say probably no, it's probably not. And so my fond romantic feelings of Christmas, are they valid? Well, only as much as the fond memories that someone else has of Christmas, of Die Hard, and whatever that means to them. And so what is with my sermon title? Christmas with the Herods. Well, of course I'm being sarcastic, and that's the whole point. You've heard of Christmas with the Cranks, haven't you? Well, at least my title of the sermon, Christmas with the Herods, is closer to the truth than the romantic, sentimental ideas that we have concocted from our childhood memories of Christmas days or the movies that we watch at Christmas. And so my proposition I want to put to you, which is a bit of a shock and a horror message for Christmas, is that the Christmas story, when Jesus was born and the narrative that we're told in the Gospels, there was nothing really festive or jolly about it at all. Do you understand, hopefully, what I'm trying to say? In fact, telling the story of Herod the Great fits in with the Christmas narrative more than telling the story of Christmas with the Cranks will ever do. You see, when Jesus was born, now this is my first point. When Jesus was born, The Bible gives us a narrative, a story. And you know something? It's not rated G. And it's not rated even PG. It's right out there. Yet we have managed to decorate it, whitewash it, clean it up with some tinsel and some baubles and bonbons and made it kiddie-proof. The story of Jesus' birth, and this is a quote I just want to read out. The story of Jesus' birth has absolutely nothing to do with cuddly babies, exchanging gifts, or celebrating family togetherness, let alone snow, reindeers, mistletoe, and Santa Claus. It is, in fact, about imperial control, social prejudice, unwedded mothers, political refugees, pagan astrologers, violence, bereavement, and a murderous dictator. Now that just doesn't ring true, does it, of our childhood memories of what Christmas is all to be. But as we read the story, we'll see that's exactly what it's about. Because when we think of the context of Jesus coming into the world, the angel said that you shall call him Emmanuel, because God is going to be with us. And so the context of Jesus coming, what's the first thing that we know about the coming of Jesus is that he's conceived not in wedlock. Oh, scandal. The very first presentation of the narrative of Jesus is a poor girl who is with baby and she's not married. Now, in those days, the prejudice was terrible. In fact, she'd probably be stoned to death. Now, it says that, of course, Joseph was a religious man, a good man, and so he wanted to divorce her quietly and send her away quietly. Now, that's a family scandal, isn't it? But this is part of the Christmas message. Why don't we tell our kids about that bit? Because that's not PG or G. And the irony of it, of course, is the context behind it all is that this was not Israel's greatest moment in time, was it? This was not the golden era of King David, where he lived in peace and all was well in the land. This was a time of Roman imperialism, where Rome ruled the streets, where their religion was brought to a mockery. It's where Caesar brought the crested eagles and marched them into the temple. It's where they crucified the Pharisees. This was not Israel's greatest moment in the Holy Land, because it was actually not a holy land anymore. It had been corrupted. The priesthood was corrupt. The politics was corrupt. Herod the Great was a puppet king. And yet, strangely, we're told that Joseph was worried about the impression because Mary would be breaking the law. And of course, you see the irony in the hypocrisy in all of that, because we have scandal upon scandal. The circumstances of Jesus' birth. A political decree goes out, and people have to return to the land because of a census. Well, we all know what politics is like, don't we? When governments tell us to do something, what do? Up and, unwillingly we go and do it. But when a government tells us to do something that is ungodly, and for the Jews, doing a census was one of the most pagan things you could do, again, it's another scandal. It's an horrendous thing to do. And worst of all, where does it put Mary? Where does it put Joseph and the coming baby? It puts them on a donkey heading to a strange town that is not their home. I want you to imagine that just for a minute, what that feels like. Celise. Can we use you as an example? Celise has just had a baby. Imagine how she would feel if Francis wakes up and says, "Hey, Celise, we've got to go to Kuri-Rup." This is not working because you guys are from South Africa and you don't even know where Kuri-Rup is. So, who's got a baby that's lived here in the valley? just recently. Yeah, nah, this is going downhill quickly. We better move on. But you get the point, don't you? You wouldn't be impressed if you had to travel and then you couldn't go in your Amarok, but you had to go on a donkey. Now, this is real. I know I'm trying to make it funny, but it's real. Imagine how Mary would feel about having to travel late in the day, in the night, near her birth, on a donkey to a strange town. This is not your ideal birth, is it? No. Well, it gets worse. Because they get to Bethlehem and they're told that there's no room in the inn. There's no room at all. And worse still, as the birth was given, Jesus would be laid to rest in what? A lowly manger. Now, I kind of laugh when I hear a Christmas title, called the lowly manger in Bethlehem, because do you know what a manger is, don't you? Who's a farmer? Where's our farmers? What's a manger? Come on. A food stall. You've all seen them, and you probably haven't recognised it, but those sort of triangle-shaped racks where the farmers put their hay, that's a manger. Now, we often forget that because when I say the word manger to you, you think of this cuddly, sort of, Sunday school narrative scene of a baby in this nice manger. But it was basically a food trough. And what did you find in food troughs? Another farmer, please. I'll tell you what you find, because I used to be on a farm. There's rats and mice and spiders and all manner of insects. And it makes me laugh when we say that Jesus was, placed in a lowly manger, as though there's a premium manger and a mid-tier, manger, and then we have Jesus by virtue was in the lowly manger. It wasn't a lowly manger. It was just a crap place to put any baby, let alone the King of Glory. It was just an unacceptable place to put your baby. Let's just call it for what it is. It is totally unacceptable. To place any child in such a position. But our beloved carols try to give it virtue, and we try to romanticise the idea, but at the end of the day, it was just a shocking birth story, wasn't it? It was just a howler of a birth story. And if you don't think that is true, just think back when you had your child and what it was like and how you felt. And then try to place yourself in Mary's position and how you'd feel. You would be beside yourself with grief, with agony. It would be horrific and it would be terrible. And I think that is exactly what the Bible is trying to tell us, that it was a terrible story. But it gets worse because the people that visited, they weren't your closest family friends, were they? You've had this horrific birth, and then all of a sudden you have these shepherds come and visit you, strangers. Now, we all know what it's like to have a baby, don't we? Us men are right up there. We're very empathetic and we know exactly how we feel. But for the women's sake, you've just had your baby. How do you feel? Anyone want to? Tired, exhausted? Do you feel like socialising? Do you want people coming to visit? Perhaps your mum, maybe some close family friends. How would you feel if a bunch of European backpackers who work in the local field picking grapes come decide to visit you? It's just like, well, who are you guys? It's like, why are you here? Again, it's not an ideal situation. And then the people that do bring you gifts, at last we get to the bit where someone brings some gifts. And who is it that brings them? Well, once again, they're strangers, outsiders. Magi, they're called. But they're not people from the Holy Land. They're not Orthodox prophets of Israel. But again, outsiders, not of their home, not of their nation, but astrologers from the East, not even of their faith. There was no John Piper there. There was no John MacArthur. It wasn't Billy Graham. They were pagan astrologers. Now, if we get into horoscopes, what do us Christians do? Oh, tut, tut, tut. What about astrology? Are we Christians into astrology? Oh, tut, tut, tut. Yet here was a bunch of pagans following a star, and we all think it's wonderful. No, this was a scandal. If you were a Jew practicing divination and following stars, you probably would have been put to death. But again, this is the story of Christmas that us Orthodox Christians often fail to acknowledge and see, that the most unorthodox people are the ones that are bringing the gifts to the baby Jesus. This is a shocking way to start a Jewish life. You have to remember that Jews were even forbidden to have dinner or eat with people who are outside of the faith, yet alone someone bearing gifts to you. And why? Because the lesser is always blessed by the greater, isn't it? And patronage always means that those that are given the gifts sometimes come out looking the best. Put all this together, allow the birth of Jesus to be told without all the sweet lullabies and the romantic ideas of what we want Christmas to look like for our kids, and we may be shocked to see what is really there. Just listen to the story and you'll start to see the darkness. Just take your rose-colored glasses off and you'll start to see the drama that Mary and Joseph had to go through. You'll start to see the fear. You'll start to sense the horror. And you'll see the scandals that no proud parent would ever want for their birth of their firstborn son. Emmanuel, God is with us, the angels proclaimed, and that the Son of God's reception into this world as the King of glory was to be relegated to a goat's food trough is a remarkable story in itself. The angel said that this would be a sign. Go and you'll find the baby wrapped in swaddling cloths in a manger. Now, we hear that and it just, it goes straight over the top of our heads. We don't see what it is because we've been so indoctrinated that a manger is a wonderful place to be. But when the angel said it was a sign indeed. And I'll sum that point up later at the end of my sermon. But that's not the worst of it, because there's another character in the Christmas story that, to be frank, we never hear about him, do we? And that's Herod the Great. The irony of his name, Herod the Great. But he was indeed part of the Christmas story. Yet, have you ever heard of a festive Christmas carol with Herod the Great in it? Here comes Herod the Great, dum, 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 dum. And the Sunday school pageant where the kids are dressed up as, I'm Herod the Great. It's just like, yeah, no. It's kind of like it's been edited, washed out, deleted, cancelled from Christmas. So let me shed some light, a little bit more light, on the title of my sermon, Christmas with the Herods. You see, when Jesus was born, the story of Herod now makes the narrative rated MA, not suitable for children, mature audience only. And the background to King Herod, is interesting, and it's good just to go back and just look at King Herod for a second. He was in charge of Jerusalem from 4 BC, but he really didn't get full control until 37 BC when Rome basically wiped out all his enemies, and so he could rule. Now, why was he called Herod the Great? Does anyone know? Because he doesn't sound like a great character, does he? But he's called Herod the Great because he actually was the guy who rebuilt the temple at Jerusalem. Did you know that? And not only did he rebuild the temple at Jerusalem, he single-handedly created the city of Caesarea. You see, there was no port in Israel. And so what he did was he took all these ships and he sunk them and he used the hulls for a breakwater and he created a port. He's a pretty cluey bloke. In Jerusalem, he had it facelifted, the whole city. In addition, he built a gorgeous palace for himself. He had the Hippodrome, a stadium, and theatres and the like. You've all heard of the Hippodrome, haven't you? Your Herod the Great built that. He also built the 7 great fortresses across the land. One of the famous ones was Masada, and I'm sure you've all heard of that. And so everything he touched diplomatically seemed to turn to gold. He kept the peace both with Jerusalem and Rome, and in that sense he was very successful. Thus they gave him the title Herod the Great. But now we get to his family life. And like all great men, you get to their family life and it gets a little bit weird and funky. So how many wives did he have? Have a guess. Well, close. He had 10. And of course, he had 10 boys. And 10 boys were all legitimately princes who all legitimately could be, what? The next king. And so he married 10, had 10 legitimate heirs. And Joseph, the historian, tells us more about Herod than any other person in the biblical history. And Herod was ruthless. He had 3 of his sons murdered simply because he thought they were being, treacherous. Then he had his favourite wife killed. So if he killed the wife, he's got to kill the mother-in-law as well. But that wasn't the only mother-in-law that he killed. He killed quite a few of his mother-in-laws. And one of the more interesting stories was one of his brother-in-laws, who was a priest. He invited him down for a game of water polo. And the game got a little bit rough and they drowned him. And so he was a treacherous dude indeed. Now, King Herod, of course, was riddled with diseases, and in his dying days, he was being consumed by all manner of diseases. And he knew that the Jews were going to celebrate his death. So what did he do? He told his sister to go gather every priest and bring them down to the Hippodrome, and he was going to kill them all. And when the sister asked, why are you doing this? He said, because I know when I die, the Jews are going to rejoice, so I want to give them something to cry about. This guy was so evil that even Augustus said, I would rather be Herod's pig than his son, because Jews didn't kill pigs, but he was known to kill his family members. And so he was indeed an evil dude, and we understand that. And of course, our story introduces Herod to the Christmas story. And this is why I'm trying to say to you, this is not the stuff of PG. This is not the sort of stories that you want to tell your kids. Herod was a twisted megalomaniac who did great things, but at the end of the day was paranoid. And to the point that when he heard from the pagan astrologers that there was a new king being born, he hatches a plan, and of course he wants to meet Jesus. You see the drama? You could make a movie out of this. He wants to meet Jesus. And so off the Magi go to meet Jesus, and in a dream, God warns the Magi, says, don't go back the way you came, because Herod seeks to kill the boy child Jesus. Why? Because this is what Herod does. He eliminates anyone who is a threat to him. And so we're told in the story that he had, and this is a terrible, terrible story, that he had every boy from the age of 0 to 2 in Bethlehem slaughtered. And then we have this scripture that talks about how Rachel cries and she cannot be comforted because of the murderous act that Herod that Herod achieved. Now, from an historical point of view, we probably know that the number of children that died was not in the hundreds or even the thousands. It was more like probably 20 to 30, because there was not that many people that lived in Bethlehem and that area. But that's not the point, is it? That the point that you would have innocent kids slaughtered because you're paranoid, what sort of Christmas story, what sort of Christmas message is that? How do you make a Christmas carol about that? And why didn't God just go, well, I'll just kill Herod? Why is Herod allowed to live and threaten Jesus to the point where an angel has got to go tell Jesus and the parents, well, not Jesus, but Joseph anyway, to flee to where? To Egypt. And the irony then that the king of Israel has to live as a refugee in a strange country, again, is just another shocking scandal for the Jews. The king of Israel, who is supposed to be welcomed with loving arms, is not only relegated to a manger, but is forced out of his own country by a ruthless dictator. And so if we're honest, and I presume that most of you are honest, hands up that are dishonest. Okay. If we're honest, Jesus' birth is a harrowing story that really no mother would ever wish for their own daughters to ever endure. We can agree with that. Who wants any of our kids to have our grandchildren born in that fashion? But to also have his first years where his life would be exposed to a paranoid megalomania that sought his death, where the answer is to be exiled in a strange country that was not their own home, that the king of Israel lived in exile. What a reception for God, Emmanuel. What a way to start your life, living under the shadow that all your peers were slaughtered by a madman simply because you came to be the king of Israel. Forgetting the nostalgia and the warm fuzziness of the Christmas carols by candlelights in the garden, why is the true story of Christmas really such a dark and harrowing tale that frankly it's not suitable for kids? And the answer is profoundly simple, and you will find it in John 3:16, which we can all quote. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but shall live forevermore." For God so loved the what? The world. The world. The world that Jesus was born into was not some outlier. It wasn't an anomaly. It was, in fact, a perfect representation of what humanity looks like. And we forget to tell the Christmas story that paints the world exactly how it really is. A pretty crappy place. The world that Jesus was born into represents humanity. It represents what we look like to a T. What? You don't think the world could be cruel to infants? Jesus faced danger, but at least one of those dangers was not faced in the womb itself. A madman who would kill his own? Seriously, have you not read the news lately of Assad, the king of Syria, who didn't murder just 20, but murdered thousands of his own countrymen for decades while the world sat back and did nothing? That the King of Glory should be relegated to sleep in a food trough? Seriously. At the carols by candlelight that will be sung in the Domain Bowl and the Sydney Myer Music Bowl, I will guarantee you that Jesus won't even get a mention. Not only will he not even get a mention, you won't even see the manger anymore. Even that won't be presented. Christmas by candlelights. When you think about it and you see it performed at the Sydney Myer Music Bowl or here at the Domain or even at Traralgon, what is it about? It's about how good we all are, isn't it? It's about how good we can sing. Have you ever watched them sing the carols? Fall on your knees and hear the angels cry. The way they sing it, the way they present it, the way it's presented with celebrities, it's all about us. It's all about how wonderful we are. It's all about how excited and how festive and how wonderful we all are. God forbid that anyone should tell the Christmas story in its true narrative that reflects what we're truly like. Yes, the world that Jesus was born into was our world. And most parents, and I know because Daniel's one of them, they won't let their kids watch the news, will we? Why not? Because if you watch the news, you would even know that a madman this very week, in fact, a doctor of all people, drove his BMW at high speed into a crowd of Christmas shoppers in Berlin. Now that's terrible, isn't it? We don't want to hear stories like that at Christmas. But our Christmas narrative is actually filled with stories just like that. A bad man that went out and killed innocent people. Christmas with the Herods is not a nostalgic, romantic telling of our childhood memories. It is, in fact, a telling of the Christmas story as it really should have been and always should have been, its reality. It is, in fact, a wake-up call to remind us of how bad the world was and is and always will be. There will never be room for Jesus in the inn. Do you understand that? It doesn't matter what century he is born. There will never be room for Jesus in the inn. There will always be people trying to kill him off. Jesus will always be relegated to sleep outside in our lives. And that's what makes the story of Emmanuel, God with us, so truly romantic in the real sense and the right sense. For God so loved the world, a world that tried to kill him, a world that tried to ignore him, a world that relegated God's holy Son to a manger. That is the world that God says he loves. That is who we are. That is the world. And if we look in the mirror and look carefully, you'll all see a little megalomaniac there. He's there. He's just winking at you. You'll always see someone who doesn't have room for Jesus in his inn. And yet it says that God came to us. That is us. And yet he comes to us to experience the worst of us, to be betrayed by us, to eventually be killed by us. And after all of that, he forgives us. And that forgiving us only has a real deep impact when we understand how the world really treated Jesus as a baby in the first place. Because I know if anyone treated my kids that poorly, there would be no forgiveness. Zero. I would wipe them out. I would destroy them. But we relegated, and I say we because we're all federation as humanity, we relegated Jesus to a manger. And at the end of the day, when Christ is dying on the cross, when we finally kill him off, he says these incredible words. He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Amen. God bless, and I hope we all have a very reflective Christmas.